Hi everybody, this is the Week 8 quiz help video for Concorde College Algebra. My name is Bill Troutman and I am your algebra instructor. Alright, I believe this week we only have 7 questions on the quiz, so let's take a look at it. First, it says solve using the quadratic formula. So let's take a look at the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula, by the way, anytime you see the word solve, we're trying to find out what x equals. When you see the word solve, we're trying to find out what the x equals. So what we're going to do is do the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared. Give me a second. Sometimes it won't write small. B squared minus 4 times A times C. All divided by, the whole thing divided by 2 times A. So that's the quadratic formula, okay? So in order to use the quadratic formula, you have to make your quadratic equation look like this. Ax squared minus, or plus or minus, Ax squared, you can have a plus or minus here, Bx plus C equals 0. In other words, everything has to be on one side and then 0 on the other. So I have the x squared here, I have the x. So I need to just take the 1 over to the left-hand side. You see, I need to get a 0 on the right. So I just need to take the 1 over on the left-hand side. So it's a plus 1. So get the 1 to the other side. You subtract 1 to both sides. If you notice here, we get 0. Over here, we get 2x squared plus 3x minus 1 equals 0. Now, we're ready for the quadratic formula. This is our quadratic equation. This is our equation. And this is the formula. If you notice, we have to get it in this form. A is always the number in front of the x squared. So in this case, A equals 2. B is always the number in front of the x. So B equals 3. And C is always the number without the x, and C equals not 1, but it equals negative 1. So you see it's the sign of the number also. So A is 2, B is 3, and C is negative 1. When you have it in this form, x squared, x, and then no x, the numbers in front, the coefficients, are the A, B, and C. We're just going to plug it into the formula now. So let me write down the formula again. X equals, but I'm going to use parentheses, a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Now, some of you are saying, oh, I don't need to put the parentheses. I can just put numbers in there. Use the parentheses. Oftentimes, people who do not use the parentheses end up getting signs incorrect. Use the parentheses. Now we just have to plug the correct numbers into the correct spaces. A is 2, so I'm going to plug a 2 everywhere there's an A in the formula. You see right here and right here. A 2 goes here and a 2 goes here. B is 3. Put a 3 in the B spot. And then C is negative 1. Okay, so we have all the numbers plugged in, A, B, and C. Let's do the math. X equals minus 3 plus or minus the square root. Okay, I'm going to do all the square inside here. You can just plug it straight into your calculator, not the square root, but everything in there. Or you could do it using the order of operations. 3 squared is 9. And then multiply all these together. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 1 is a positive 8. Do you see how that works? 3 squared is 9, and then I multiply these together and their signs, I get 8. 9 plus 8 is 17. So in the square root, you should have 17 over 4. Now, this is my answer. We're done. You can simplify this by trying to take stuff out of the square root. Nothing pops out of the square root because 17 is a prime number. I just want everybody to understand what this plus or minus here really means. It means we have two answers. One answer is x equals negative 3 plus the square root of 17 over 4. And the other answer is x equals negative 3 minus the square root of 17 over 4. Do you see that plus or minus here really means we have two answers for this problem? One with a plus and one with a minus. And you can actually put this on your calculator and get the decimal equivalent for these answers. All right, so that's using the quadratic formula. Let's try the next problem. What should be added to both sides to solve by completing the square? So, step I don't teach solve by completing the square in this course. For me, if it asks what is the answer, what does x equal by solving by completing the square, I wouldn't solve it by completing the square. I would use the quadratic formula, which we just used. Get the 9 to the other side. A would be 1, B would be 7, and C would be negative 9. That's what I would do if they asked me to solve this on a test or the homework, okay? Even though they said complete the square, that's what I would do. So for the quiz, I'm just going to show you how to do the part for the quiz. It says, what should be added to both sides to solve by completing the square? This is what you do. There's pretty much just a two-step process. Step 1, take whatever half of b is. And you don't have to bring the 9 over for this. In fact, when you're completing a square, this is the way you want it to be. So we're going to take half of b. Do you see b is the number, right? A is the number in front of x squared. B is the number in front of x. And then c is the number without the x when it brings over to the other side. But b is 7. So let's take half of 7. 1/2 times 7. And 7 is just 7 over 1 in a fraction. So 1/2 times 7 over 1 equals 7 over 2. So that's step 1. Step 2, square whatever you get for step 1. So we have 7 over 2. We're going to square it. 7 squared is 49, and 2 squared is 4. So we ended up, step 2, you square the 7, you get 49. Square the 2, you get 4. This is the answer. What should you add to both sides? You should add 49 over 4 to both sides. That's the answer. Now, I'm not going to complete this problem by completing the square. The answer is you should be adding 49 over 4. You take whatever half of b is, and then you square it. I would rather you solve, if it says find the answer, solve for x, I'd rather use the quadratic formula or solve by factoring if you could. This problem doesn't factor, so you would solve by using the quadratic formula. It's just completing the square is another process that we really don't need to worry about. I mean, it's a nice process if you're going on further, but in math. But for this course, I say solve by using the quadratic formula is more than enough. All right, let's see what problem 3 is. How many solutions does this equation have? Okay, so they don't, in this problem, they don't want to find the answer. They don't want us to solve for x. You see, they're not asking to solve for x. What they're asking you is, how many answers are there going to be? How many solutions does this equation have? How many answers? Normally they ask how many answers and what types. Okay, so we're going to use something called the determinant. The determinant. The determinant is the inside part of the quadratic formula, the inside of the square root. The determinant equals the b squared minus the 4ac, not the square root part, but just the inside of the quadratic formula, the b squared minus 4ac. So we're going to calculate the determinant, okay? We're going to calculate the determinant on this. In order to do that, remember the standard quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you have to get everything to one side. I'm going to take the 15 to the other side, minus 15 minus 15. I end up with 2x squared plus 5x minus 15 equals 0. Okay, so this is what I end up with. Okay, so we just had to find a, b, and c. So you see we have to plug it into the determinant. So a is 2. A is the number in front of the x squared. B is 5. B is the number in front of the x. And c is negative 15. So we're going to plug it into b squared minus 4 times a times c. Not the whole quadratic equation, or not the whole quadratic formula, just the stuff in the square root. So b is 5, b squared minus 4 times a is 2, times c is negative 15. So then we're going to do the math. 5 squared is 25. We're going to multiply all this together. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times a negative 15. Negative times a negative is a positive. And I get 120. When I add these together, I get 145. Okay, so that's the answer to my determinant. Okay, so the question is, how many solutions does this equation get? Now, the determinant will determine what kind of solutions and how many you get, okay? So, if, let me put this in a different color. If the determinant is positive, in other words, if the determinant is greater than 0, right? Positive numbers are greater than 0. So if the determinant is positive, then you will have 2 real solutions. If the determinant, if this answer down here is negative, in other words, if the determinant is less than 0, if it's negative, you will have 2 imaginary solutions. Imaginary solutions. Those are solutions with i's in them, right? If you have a negative inside of a square root, right? This is the stuff that's in a square root. If you end up having a negative, you're going to end up having an answer with an I. So if the determinant is negative, you would have 2 imaginary solutions. And if your determinant actually equals 0, you will just have 1 real solution. So if the determinant is positive, you're going to have 2 real solutions. If the determinant is negative, you're going to have 2 imaginary solutions with i's. And if the determinant equals 0, you will have 1 real solution. So how many solutions does this equation have? Our determinant is a positive number. So we are going to have 2 real solutions for this problem. Next problem, write the quadratic equation for the solution, -5, 6. So this is kind of backwards of what we've been doing in the past. They're telling us x equals -5 and 6. They're telling us the answer already, right? They're telling us the answer already. So before we do this problem, let me show you a problem that we've done in the past. Okay, let me show you a problem that we've done in the past. X squared plus 1x minus 30 equals 0. So this is not the problem we're doing right now. This is not the problem we're doing right now. This is a problem from the past. And we were told to solve this. What we would do, we would factor this first. 30 is 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6. Do you see 5 and 6 work out to give me a positive 1, a -5 and a +6. So in other words, I have an x -5 and an x +6 that I put in here equals 0. Then I solve for x. And I get x equals 5 because I take the, x minus 5 equals 0. And then x plus 6 equals 0. Get the x by itself, get the 5 to the other side, you add 5, so x equals 5. Get the 6 to the other side, you minus 6, so x equals -6. So these are my two solutions for this problem right up here, okay? But the problem we're about to have is we have this as our answer. Do you see? We have our answers already. So what we have to do is work backwards to get this. They say, what's the quadratic equation? So we're going to start with this part and move backwards to get this. So let me erase this and show you how we're going to do this. So we're starting with the two answers. In this case, it's x equals, and I think I had the signs wrong for my answer. They weren't wrong, but they were just for my problem. But here are the two answers. X equals -5 and x equals 6. Okay, so to find the quadratic equation, we're going to put two big parentheses equal to 0. We're going to put an x and an x. And remember, to get it to the other side, you had to do the opposite sign. So I'm not putting a -5 in here. I'm going to put a +5 in here. Do you see, for x plus 5 equals 0, take the 5 to the other side, I have to -5, -5. So you see, that's how I get an answer of x equals -5. So you have to change the sign when you put it in the parentheses. You have to change the sign when you put it in the parentheses. I'm trying to get my, hang on. Okay. All right, so we're going to put the two big parentheses. X, X. And we're going to change the sign. The -5 is going to change to a +5. And the +6 is going to change to a -6. See, now all we have to do is multiply these together. So first we put them in the parentheses as the opposite signs, and then we FOIL this. X times x is x squared. X times a -6 is a -6x. 5 times x is a positive 5x. 5 times a -6 is a -30. We can combine these two. -6 and a +5 is a -1x. And we're done. Write the quadratic equation where these two are the answers, the solutions. This is the answer. This is my quadratic equation. Do you see? If I factor this again, this is the answer, by the way. If I factor this again, it would factor to x plus 5, x minus 6 equals 0. Solve each to 0, get the 5 to the other side. You see, I'd get a -5. get the 6 to the other side by adding 6, I get a plus 6. So this is what my solution would be. All right, so you're just going to put them in the opposite signs here. Okay, next question. Which function represents the piecewise? Okay, well, this question on the quiz, this is one I'm not going to do. It was just too difficult to put these graphs on here and all that. So I definitely want you, before this quiz, to get into the book and look up piecewise functions. Piecewise functions. What they are is pretty much, it's going to be a graph. But what it is several different functions. It might start off with a function being y equals 2x plus 3 for a certain period of time. So 2x plus 3 might look like this. And then it might have y equals 5. Y equals 5 is a straight line that goes through 5. And then it might have another function that goes like this. So what it is like 2 or 3 different equations, and there are certain different points of x on our graph that they want you to look at and find the correct one. So look at this one in the book and go over it. This is one of those that it's a little confusing, but you have to look at all the equations to make sure which one is the correct piecewise function for all the equations. All right, so I think we have one more question only. So it was a really short quiz this week. It says, what are the solutions to the quadratic function graph below? So we don't see a graph, so I'm going to make one. Here's my graph. I'm going to just draw it like this. Quadratic function is normally a U-shaped graph or an upside down U-shaped graph. It says, what are the solutions? So the solution is where the graph crosses the x-axis, where the graph crosses the x-axis. And do you see, this is the x-axis. So the points where the graph crosses the x-axis, right here and right here. Do you see, this is where our graph crosses that x-axis, this x-axis here. And it crosses at these 2 points. So you can just write the coordinate. This could be x1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It could be x7, y0, because it doesn't go up. The y is always going to be 0 for a solution. Here, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4. The coordinate is -4, 0. So these are the 2 solutions for our graph. It's wherever our graph crosses the x-axis. And that's it. That's all the problems I had for you on the quiz this week. Once again, the piecewise function, probably going to be the hardest one for you. Make sure you go through the book and look at that. Call me if you have any questions. You guys have a great week. That's it.